Okay, it looks like we have most of our participants here, so let's get started. Hello and welcome to our third Black Anatomy event this week, celebrating our second Black Anatomy week. And this one is Reclaiming the Body, Anatomy Textbooks versus Reality. So I'm Sean McWatt. I'm one of the founding members and vice presidents of Black Anatomy. And I'm joined today by several medical illustrators who are working to make their field more inclusive and representative of the diversity that we have in our community, as well as some members of the Pop Art Initiative, which stands for Portfolios of People Advancing an Anatomical Representation Together. And that's a project that aims at expanding the diversity of anatomical images that we use in education. So among our medical illustrator panelists today, we have Nika Ford, S.J. Okemow, Anekay Kelly, Eva Mae Baucom, and also joining us from the Pop Art team are Dr. Jerry Guillot and Dr. Kelly Harrell. So the goal of this session is to stimulate a discussion on improving diversity and representation in the images we use to teach in the health sciences, as well as how we communicate medical concepts to the lay public. So as the moderator, I welcome you as audience members to use the Q&A feature to submit questions as we go to our panelists, and I'll try my best to get to everybody. But you can also raise your hand and ask a question verbally. Just a reminder too, if you're live tweeting this event, you can use the hashtags BlackAnatWeek and hashtag Reclaiming the Body as a way to link your tweet to the conversation online. So in the interest of time, I'll, instead of introducing each panelist on my own or by myself here, I'm just going to go around and have them give a quick description of who they are and what they do. So I'm going to start with who's in the top left of my screen, and that's Dr. Kelly Harrell.
Good evening from Richmond, Virginia. Good afternoon or good morning from wherever you are. I'm in Richmond, Virginia at the Virginia Commonwealth University School of Medicine. I teach anatomical sciences, including gross anatomy, histology, and embryology. And I am one of the representatives of the Pop Art team. So happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
I guess we'll go to the next Pop Art member, Dr. Jerry Guillot. Jerry wants to unmute there. Can you hear me, Jerry? No. Okay, we'll skip Jerry. We'll come back to him. Let's go to Anekay.
Hi, my name is Anekay Kelly. I'm a neurosurgical medical illustrator here in Augusta, Georgia, and I'm happy to be here. I can't wait to hear what you guys have to say.
Cool. Jerry, are you back now? Okay.
I am. Now I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Sorry about that. My name is Jerry Guillot, and so I come to the group as a medical illustrator. I graduated from MCG. I suppose I'll say when in 2000, and but I also come to the group as an anatomist. So my PhD in anatomy and education came from IU School of Medicine, and I'm currently at the University of Louisville School of Medicine, where I teach both medical and dental students anatomy.
Cool. SJ?
So, hey, I'm S.J. Okemow. I'm a mixed Nahio and Eastern European medical illustrator. I grew up in Calgary in Treaty 7 territory, and I'm currently living in Toronto on Treaty 13 territory. I'm doing my PhD in molecular visualization right now, and happy to be here. So, thanks.
Great. Eva?
Hi, my name is Eva Mae Baucom. I'm a first-generation Filipino-American. I went to the UIC program in Chicago. I'm currently living in San Francisco on unceded Ohlone land, and I am working freelance for myself at a studio called Afferent Visual Science, and one of my main contracts is the New England Journal of Medicine.
Great, and last but not least, Nika.
Hello, I'm Nika Ford. I'm from Atlanta, Georgia. I'm currently in New York. I'm an academic medical illustrator for the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai, and I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody. So as I said, I really encourage you as audience members to put some questions in the Q&A or just to raise your hand and ask. But to get us started, I'll kind of just ask a general question open to anybody. And that's, what are your feelings about the degree of diversity in medical images currently? So our idea of textbooks versus reality. And why is increasing diversity in the images we use important? And why don't we start with somebody from the pop art team?
I'll go ahead and say something about that. I think I'm safe in saying that I might be the oldest person here on the screen as I'm looking around. So I think I'd like to say just a quick word about how things have changed from when I was a student, for example, in the very early 90s in medical school. There were 2 non-white students in my class of 100. And the idea of diversity in medical imaging or in any teaching stuff at all was just not talked about. I mean, at all. A student, no student would dream of bringing up that topic with faculty back then. Faculty were like on pedestals, and you just did what you were told, no matter who you were, if you wanted to survive in medical school. And so the topics that were elevated to the level of a faculty member were very specific, and diversity was not even a topic, at least not in my experience. Of course, back then I was a 20-something-year-old, white male, which happens to sort of correspond with the sort of the so-called perfect model for illustrators from back in the day, and I'm sure we'll be talking about that a little bit in more detail later. But nonetheless, that just was not talked about, and I just want to contrast with my experience today as an educator, where students readily bring this topic up, not only amongst themselves but also sharing directly with faculty. So the student-faculty relationship is profoundly different than it was in the late 80s and the early 90s. And so I think that's really something to recognize when we talk about the importance of increasing diversity, in that students feel much more open in talking about this, and the profound impact that they express to us as educators is something that I think is really carrying this movement forward. And I have mentioned the pop art project, which we'll talk a little bit more about later, with my students, and the response has been really, really profound. And things like this is profound joy is what I experience as a student, to be able to see people who look like me in the images, that I used to teach. And so, profound joy is not something you get to hear somebody say every day, particularly in these intense sort of environments of education. So I just think it's profoundly important that we do increase the diversity of these images, because it has such a profound effect on our learners.
Couldn't agree more. And does anyone from the medical illustrator side have something to say? I know, Jerry, you kind of bridged that gap between anatomist and medical illustrator, but as practicing medical illustrators, what do you think about the importance of this diversity and increasing it in our images? Maybe I'll elect somebody. Let's hear SJ. Start us off.
Oh man. Yeah, I mean, I think it has changed a lot for me. I did my master's, I guess I graduated, I'll say the year, in 2014. No, 2015. I actually don't remember now. I think it was 2014. But yeah, and I do feel like this next generation of medical illustrators that I've seen coming out of the program, it's so much more at the forefront of their minds. And I think it's being taught a lot more in programs as well, which is really exciting to see that importance. Yeah, pushed forward by not only the students, but also being pushed forward by faculty, I think is really, really, really awesome. Yeah.
Cool. So kind of building off that, and I guess something that Jerry mentioned there was the concept of the homo perfectus, right? In this idealized form, especially as illustrators, you're likely taught to kind of work toward as a sort of white male standard for the body. So do you have any of your own examples or experiences that speak to those standards being reinforced, especially for our medical illustrators in your upbringing, your educational upbringing? And maybe Eva, you can comment on this, as I know you talked about it a bit in our original conversations planning this event.
Yeah, sure. So one of the things that we learn in our programs is not only like an artistic aspect, but the medical aspect. And so on the art side, one of the things that we are kind of taught to focus on, especially if it's didactic, like in the textbooks, is to kind of emphasize this light and aesthetic drawing. And that's for some practical reasons, like if you're printing it or if you're trying to clarify certain anatomies. But anyway, that's like one of the key focuses that the students are taught. And then what you said about like homo perfectus and what Jerry was mentioning is just this basically perfect human or standard body in our anatomy textbooks, which is basically white, able-bodied, and athletic males. So basically in our courses, and for the medical students or any healthcare professionals that are learning from these books, they are presented with this standard and you're reinforced with this ideal body, but that inadvertently or advertently, makes this standard from which to judge everything else by. So anything that deviated in would seem wrong, quote unquote wrong, which would include variations of anatomy. So even physical features, I guess. And someone had told me once that, well, yes, there's variation in anatomy, that when I'm drawing it, I should be careful not to make that variation look pathological, like a disease or something, just because there's like this standard that we're very used to. And that I always think about that. And also as students, you're using these references, but you're trying to be aware of the current state and you want to make things more diverse. And some things that you might naturally go to is a reference of yourself, especially if you're from these other marginalized communities. And I had a classmate once who used themselves as a reference, but because they themselves didn't match the standardized white, able-bodied, whatever, they were kind of critiqued against that. And it's just goes to show you the kind of standard that is reinforced in the schools still. But, I think that people are getting more aware of it. Like SJ was saying, the students are becoming more empowered to do something different. And I also just want to say that the training programs really have a responsibility to reflect reality and to prepare the physicians to care for real people. And that's all of us. So, and also one more thing, to just acknowledge the basic fact that people do deviate from homo perfectus, like that very basic fact.
That's super important to acknowledge. And I think we touched on that in our session yesterday too, on the pelvic, inclusive pelvic anatomy, as something that has ripples, just our basic teaching having ripples into clinical practice. And it's really important. Does anyone else have anything to comment on any of that before
I might point out something that just kind of occurred to me, that one of the things that students struggle with, I think, is that they want to learn one thing. They want to learn the standard. The majority of people look like this when you're talking about an arterial pattern or a nervous, the plexus. And when we teach, we say, oh, when we come across an anomaly which we might talk about the word choice of anomaly, but when we see variations in the lab, we oftentimes will say, oh, well, we're not going to test on that because it's not standard or it's not normal. So we have this reinforcement that we have a singular kind of standard anatomical thing to learn, and whatever that means. And so then as illustrators, that comes up quite a bit to say, this is the material that's going to be used to teach students. And so you teach the standard textbook version of whatever it is. And so I think there's an interesting sort of comparison between that, the value that learners are placing in that, and thus educators sort of tend to emphasize, with the the sort of the opposite of that, of embracing diversity and all anomalies or variations or whatever kind of language you want to use. So those two things are happening at the same time, and I think that's something to think about. I will say, actually, going back to my comprehensive exam as a graduate student, I think there were 3 projects. This was a long time ago, so forgive me. And one of the projects was I had to illustrate the implantation procedure for a left ventricular assist device, right? And so all of that was going to have, no surface anatomy whatsoever, except for, the famous orientation piece, like where the incision was going to be. So there you have to include a body. So I had very little time. So what I did was I grabbed a reference. Now, remember, this is like 99. So I grabbed reference material of this sort of perfectly in shape, 20 probably something year old male. And it was a lot black and white line drawing, and that was the orientation piece. And then the rest of the piece was all left ventricular assist, implantation stuff. Only one judge for the comprehensive exam said, I think your orientation model looks, I think the quote was, awfully buff to need a left ventricular assistant device. So nobody else noticed, that's his faculty, critiquing a comprehensive exam. Nobody else paid any attention to the fact that this person was a completely inappropriate patient for the illustrations that I was doing. And so that was built into the faculty back then. So it's very different now, I think, but still something.
That's interesting. It's like an alignment question too for educational design. So excellent. So speaking of kind of these educational constructs and things like this that are influencing I guess the work and what we see, it's sort of like a cyclical relationship, right, of our resources that we have and how that influences teaching and vice versa. So maybe I can direct this one at Anekay. What are some aspects of your education in anatomy specifically that you thought lacked representation of diverse individuals, and how did this influence your work?
Okay, so throughout my program, we study initially from cadavers. So we use cadavers, aka human body donors. We're very appreciative of them. However, I realized that throughout my time there, I had never seen a Black cadaver before. And I narrowed it down to maybe it was a cultural thing, it wasn't being pushed out to them. And so instinctively, I feel like a lot of my classmates, including myself, we went to just drawing that basic white person, and a lot of our references were also white figures. And we have that type of mentality going forward. We think, okay, a clean background, a white background, everything is neat, like what Eva said. And it's that type of same mentality we use for skin complexion, which is kind of disastrous when you think about it, because different skin complexions present different things. If we have a scar, if we have a bruise, a rash. And so moving into the workforce, I'm starting to think, okay, I'm doing this bruise or I'm doing this rash. I can't guess how it might present in a Black person. And most of the times when you pull up something on Google, the references are saying a rash is red. It's, and that's not how it might present on me. That's not how it might present on other people. But when I say I can't guess how it shows up in Black person, because it might show up as a dark purple, it might show up as red, it might show up as a lighter brown. And so if there were more references online, that would be more helpful for us to know where to source our like information from to add this to our drawings. So that's where the education system kind of impacted how we move forward.
Sorry, I was on mute. Thanks for that. Does anyone else have anything to build off of that? Maybe Nika, we haven't heard from you yet.
Yeah, yeah, I was actually going to jump in on that too. I think working in the academic medical education space, I see a lot of those kinds of materials, and I do agree that like the curriculum is lacking diversity, even in like photographic images that students use as reference material, but it has increased a lot in like more recent years. There are different initiatives like Mind the Gap that have come out over the past couple of years too, which is like a handbook on dermatological conditions on different skin tones. So I definitely think that it's something on the forefront of people's minds, especially just in the medical education space. But like Anekay was saying, I think that the cadavers that, you know, medical students use to learn from, resources where you have photographs of like how different skin conditions present differently on different skin tones is so important to have, because as people who are brown and black and brown, we're not a monolith. Like everything is there's going to be so many nuances, and there's not a standard way that something looks. So having that reference material is really important as a medical illustrator, and also for anyone just learning in that space, like the students and stuff that I've worked with before at my job. So yeah, it's really important. I definitely think as time has progressed, there have been more resources that have come out, which are super helpful as far as like reference material and understanding how something can look differently and stuff. And so I think that in my practice, I've learned a lot in more recent years about how everything is just so nuanced when it comes to this representation and how different it can be. And so it's really important for us to pay attention to that, to make sure that we're representing something exactly like whatever the client is asking for. We're being very specific to that and being specific to the race or ethnicity or whatever it is that we're showing in an illustration.
Very nice. So I guess kind of bridges nicely into a question from the audience here. And this is one from Zachary Cluckert. And says, great points about variability and diversity. I have had some students express frustration, even irritation upon seeing that variation is ubiquitous. Has anyone come up with an effective way to communicate the value in knowing variation, perhaps a step towards diversity, when the students are often so focused on staying on track with high yield content only? And I'll say personally, I really hate that term, high yield content, but I digress. So anyone have any comments on that?
I could jump in. Having just worked with some fourth year medical students who we've brought back into the lab so that they can do some more focused dissections. And in the upper extremity, we often see, as Jerry said, those variations in vasculature. And I just think it's such a cool opportunity to lead them through some of that ambiguity. Like, well, what do you think it is? Where is it going? Why would this be clinically important for you to know, right? If we have a more superficial arterial vessel and you think you might be doing an injection into a vein, how might we need to know this variation, right? It isn't all of it's high yield. So I just use that as an opportunity to get them to think a little bit deeper instead of just trying to match what they see on the donor to what they might see in an illustration. Especially in that brachial plexus and axillary artery area, we always see a lot of that variation. So I just try to pique their curiosity. And while I do agree, I don't love the idea of, well, we're not going to test that. I kind of feel like we should test that, but that's a whole nother conversation. I just think keeping them curious and understanding that frustration is actually good for their learning, right? Making them go through, well, what do you think it is? Why? Where is it going? To me, that's the fun part, because then there's the light bulb that goes off.
I totally agree. I think there's definitely some like anxiety associated with that. Like we could test any variation, but there is, if they're learning anatomy correctly, they can use their logic to arrive at the answer, ideally. Jerry, I saw you unmute down there.
Oh yeah. I was just gonna share that I remember having a student who was just overtly angry and interestingly at the donor repeatedly if the donor had a variation. The sentiment was, because I couldn't resist probing further, the sentiment was that student felt like the donor had failed them in being a good teacher because it didn't match the textbook, and that was a waste of the student's time. And so, I mean, admittedly, that's an extreme, but I think, y'all are totally right. It's a perfect opportunity to encourage the students to go deeper in their thinking and say that this is about, there are several skills that we're developing here, and one of them is problem solving and thinking. So, I oftentimes will make the stupid joke that, not all of your patients are going to read the textbook and the atlas. So you need to be prepared for this kind of variation. And so it's really your responsibility, as part of your training, to be aware of this and to have a healthy way to approach how to think and problem solve when this comes up.
I have similar experiences as Jerry because I taught some graduate students anatomy. We had to do the dissections and everything. And I did have a couple students who did say, yeah, it's a waste of time if the body doesn't look like the textbook, you know what I mean? And when it came on to like this year was the first time. Throughout my school, I didn't see it, but this year was the first time I saw a Black or even colored. There were a variation of different types of races in there. And there was a darker woman, and we were doing like the pelvic area. And some of the students were confused as to why it was so dark there. And I was like, well, this is a colored person. So, it will show up in that way. And so that's why I feel like it's so important to have like a variation of skin complexions in there so that people who have never come in close interactions with people of color can see how our body looks different.
Very true. So this is kind of one that branches into a question we had prepared here as to, so not all science and medical images are anatomical, right? Or show racialized features like skin tone and things like that. So how can you promote diversity and representation in those types of images? And I know a lot of our medical illustrators here are working on neuro stuff, and how are we going to be able to depict diversity in those types of images?
I guess I could start with this one. I'm primarily working for neurosurgeons and researchers. So a lot of times I will be doing mostly brains or cells. And I'm going to address 3 points that will probably answer this question correctly. The first point are the diagrams. So I'll do mechanisms, cell mechanisms, and most of the times these are going into research articles, and they're very specific and has their evidence and points and stuff like that. If the researcher asks me for a specific cellular drawing, it's not my responsibility to add a skin complexion or a person in there. Most of the times they cover statistics of the demographic in their writing. So that's the first point. The second point is surgical pieces. I get to go and observe surgery a lot. And so most of the times I'm able to see what the patient looks like. From there, I can research what the surgery that was done is, and I can make decision as to whether I want to make that person of a person of color or make them white, you know what I mean? And there was this one time I decided that, okay, I'm gonna do this really, really nice piece, and it's gonna be a Black man. And I asked the doctor, I was like, is it fine that this person is Black? And he was just like, yeah, it's good. I draw it, complete it. And the issue was that the doctor didn't really give me the totality or the exact condition that I was drawing. And so it looked like a pituitary adenoma, but it was a craniomeningioma. And here's where it went wrong. I decided to be different and do the Black male, but craniomeningiomas mainly happen in children. And so this was a grown man. And he later on told me that his patient was a young little girl. And this changes the story of my illustration. And that's where research is important. And you have to make sure that whenever you're changing the character or adding a certain skin complexion or adding a certain age, you know who it affects. So there's that. Very important to know how you're telling your story. And the third point is the information that you are pushing out to the public is important. And so, for example, an Alzheimer's patient, when I was growing up, I grew up in Jamaica, and a lot of times we thought that Alzheimer's only happened in old white people. You know what I mean? We said, we're not victims of that. That probably won't happen to us. Our grandparents are fine. No, it actually presents mostly in Black and Hispanic. And if I'm doing an Alzheimer's piece, sometimes they would ask me to just draw the brain degenerating and without skin. But a lot of people don't relate to just a disembodied brain. So including people of different racial groups is important so that someone like me can see it online and be like, oh, wait, I didn't know that Alzheimer's happened in Black people. Let me look into this, see if I need to do more research on this. So that is important.
That's powerful. Couple stories. Thank you for that. Thank you for sharing all that. Does anyone else have anything to add on top of that?
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in real quickly to say that another way that I've shown representation in my work without skin tone is through outline and simplified illustrations. So not every illustration that I create is highly rendered with a lot of detail. And sometimes I'll actually do like outlines. If it's a very simple figure, maybe it's like for a presentation or a patient pamphlet, and there needs to be very minimal information. And so even with illustrations that don't have a lot of color, it can be black and white, it can be an outline drawing, you can still be representative of a demographic that is maybe not shown oftentimes, if it makes sense for the content. So like I've done outline illustrations of someone who was more overweight. You can also do facial features show through on outline drawing. So just even like paying attention to the differences of facial features, you can tell what race someone is without any color at all, just by how you're doing the outlines itself. You can tell that it's a person that is not white. So thinking about that, like even when I have illustrations that don't have color or have very minimal color, I'm thinking about like how I can represent someone who's not normally represented in that way as well.
Awesome. Eva?
Yeah. I just wanted to add to Anekay and Nika, like it's totally true what they're saying about these ways that you can incorporate variation and diversity in these very subtle ways. And also to add to Nika's list, you can also do a lot of hair outlines, which can be very informative too, which is something that I do a lot at the journal that I work at. And there are ways that you can incorporate things that are also culturally relevant. And so basically what I specifically do is like focus on research that scientists are doing, and then we illustrate them for a broader audience. And so that's my population there. It's like very specific. I know exactly who was included in the studies. I know the target demographic. And so I draw a lot from that resource. And one of the ways, other than what has already been mentioned, was there was a study that was about like salt, the effects of salt, but it was done very specifically in a few villages in China. And so, I'm like sifting through our like team library of illustrations that I can use. And, it would be very easy for me to go ahead and use like burgers and fries for an example of salt, which is a very Western diet. But I took the time to make sure that it was more culturally relevant to that population in the research study and did a more appropriate illustration of like some noodles and some fish and some real fun stuff. But yeah, there's just like, these kind of like non-traditional ways, or maybe not non-traditional, but like out of the box thinking that you can do for these to include variation. And that's not just arbitrary, these are like very purposeful, and you're trying to, again, more accurately represent reality or the study or whatever it may be, or like in Anekay's case, the craniomeningioma, that's only for children. You have to be very specific. And I think when you are specific, the variation comes naturally.
I think in my work, it's so because I do mostly molecular, I very rarely, like maybe like once every 4 years, end up drawing a body, even like an outline. So for me, I have to get really creative when I'm thinking about how I'm going to incorporate diversity and how I'm thinking about all of those like kind of decolonial practices. So for me, it's usually about incorporating like non-eponymous names in anything that's anatomical, making sure that I'm doing that. And in addition, because like I usually do animations as well, so it's also thinking about who the narrators are and what the purpose of that narration is, because that can be really powerful moments too when you hear someone who sounds like you. I did an animation piece, and I think it was one of its biggest downfalls was I wish I would have used somebody from Community so that it had a specific sound to it. Well, learning curves, but yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, so these answers are great, and I think to me they tell you how much you should be spending on medical illustrators for your papers and things like this. Because honestly, the amount of thought and research and effort that you guys and creativity that you put into these kinds of considerations are impressive. That said, so in a lot of cases, you might be micromanaged, we'll say, by certain clients or whoever you're working with. How do you manage that, and how do you sort of push back against something they might want? Or do you have any stories of where that might have been at play? Maybe Nika can start that one off for us.
Yeah, I think like for me, it's a very collaborative experience. Even though as medical illustrators, we are providing a service to someone, I still think of it as like a collaboration. And I've been lucky enough to have experiences where the client pretty much is aware of that it's a collaborative effort. So it's not like them just telling us exactly what to do. Although I have had experiences where a client will know exactly what they want all the way down to the T. And so I'm just creating that illustration for them. If they know exactly what they want, then it's kind of like, okay, like I don't have a whole lot of say in how my interpretation would be of what it is that they want. But when it comes to a client, maybe specifically wanting like a white able-bodied male in their image or something like that, I would say the best thing to do is kind of challenge that notion and ask them why. I've never really had anyone push back against that. If anything, I've had more experiences where someone asked me to show someone who's more diverse in the illustrations, which is really great. But I do know that a lot of medical illustrators experience the opposite of that, to where someone is wanting them to show like what they normally see because maybe that's what they're used to. So I would say challenging that notion and just asking why and letting them give the answer. Because a lot of times I don't think people or the client is really thinking about, well, who is the demographic by their health. If it's a case where it's a condition that is presenting more in a particular demographic, or maybe, they have a reason for it and they can actually justify and back that up, then okay. Otherwise, I think it's always better to err on the side of showing someone who's more diverse, just so that we are thinking of more inclusive illustrations in our whole body of work that we're creating. So yeah, I think it should definitely be, as far as like the power dynamics, it should be a collaborative effort on both sides, a conversation. Because as medical illustrators, we're not just bringing art to the table, we're also bringing design concepts, critical thinking. Like we have a lot that goes into our training. And so it's not just, creating an image. Like we also have research skills. So it's really a collaborative effort to enhance the paper, or the article, or whatever the illustration that we're creating is contributing to. I had one particular experience where I did an illustration for my client. I was an orthopedic surgeon. And after I did the illustration, they actually changed the wording in their paper because the illustration gave them clarity about what they had written, and realized that they didn't actually describe the procedure correctly in the way that they wanted to describe it. And it wasn't until they saw my illustration and I showed what muscles they were sparing, it was the below the knee amputation procedure. When I visually depicted the muscles that they were sparing, they were able to see that they actually had written it incorrectly. So that's the power that medical illustrators have. We influence science, scientific research, the way that it's written as well. So it's important, I think, for it to be a collaborative effort.
In my case, like at my job, I haven't had anyone push back on anything that I've pushed for in terms of diversity, but I have had my own internal subconscious biases. And it's from probably lived experiences or through school. And I have an example. I was doing a brochure for aftercare for stroke patients. And I was like, okay, I need to make this cover super diverse because everyone experiences a stroke, right? So I'm thinking I need to go through age. I need to go through, because you can have a stroke as young as 40 up to the oldest age ever. And I was thinking, okay, age should be a factor. Skin complexion should be a factor, race, ethnicity, and all of that. And I check off all the boxes and I came up with two figures. It was a younger, dark Black woman hugging her friend, a white older lady. And I finished it. I was so proud. And I showed my client and he was just like, where did you get this image from? I said, I illustrated it. And he's like, okay, so this gives off a stereotype that Black women are usually the caregivers or the nurses, and the white woman is the patient, and we don't want it to look like that. So I said, let me ask around and see if everyone thinks that way. And almost everyone was saying, yeah, that's a nurse. Isn't that the nurse? And I'm like, no, they're friends. But I'll go back and I'll fix it. And I made a whole new illustration with 3 individuals. They were all different races, different age groups, different genders. And I found that asking for help outside of yourself is very helpful, getting that outside perspective, because I didn't even realize that I was doing this. And just from people telling me that, I'm like, okay, I do see this. And you're right. We never want to misrepresent a group, a specific group. And we never, yeah, there it is.
Got it.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, we never want to misrepresent a group of people or give off a stereotype, or fall into giving off a stereotype. And it's beneficial to think that way and be open to asking for help. So there's that. And then also when it comes on to representing a certain group, I feel like representing it, for example, a lot of times when people are, drawing patients who have HIV, this is one that people say, don't just draw Black people, you know what I mean? And so we try to draw almost every type of race for that because everyone is affected equally. And then there are cases where when you go online, you're seeing mainly white people. And that's when you're going to be like, okay, that's when I need to draw a Black person. So you have to really analyze and see if actually this group is affected and which one. For the Alzheimer's one, when you type in Alzheimer's, you're going to see mainly white people pop up, but Black people are affected. So we draw more Black people to push it out there. So yeah.
So that's great. And another great story with lots of examples. I love it. And so on that sort of note, I mean, I'm convinced that I need to hire more medical illustrators to do any sort of communications, whether it be papers or teaching or whatever. But I don't have any funding, and I know a lot of people don't have any funding for that. And so we've had a lot of questions in the chat here about just any plans or resources that you're aware of for medical images, such as new atlases that are more diverse, or online things like the Mind the Gap resource, and where we could find those types of things. And I know that might be a good thing for pop art to start talking about. So if you want to weigh in on that.
Yeah. Yeah, I saw those questions and thought, wow, what a lead in to pop art. So Sean, let us know what pop art stands for, but I'll repeat it again. So it's portfolios of people advancing anatomical representation together. This project, this is a now fully funded educational project. Planning phase was about a year and a half, and this started sort of right at the height or summer of the pandemic, the first summer, I should say. And I won't get into the history, but we are now in sort of the creative phase of it, right? We've gotten funding, we're able to push it forward. So what is it? The goal of this project is to do exactly what we're talking about. It's to create a repository of images that represents a diverse array of people, to move away from this perfect human, right? Because that's not a thing. So in our planning phases, we thought, what does that look like? And what groups do we need to include? And we're looking at different skin tones, different ethnicities, different ages, different body habitus, different ability, even to the point that we hope to different, just even body markings, right? You don't see anyone that has tattoos on in a textbook, right? You don't see even individuals who have undergone an amputation. You don't see that, right? You see this Homo perfectus. So this repository will be web-based, and it will be, we're still in sort of the web development phase. So we're working with the Hive at University of British Columbia, who, if you know them, they do amazing work. And trying to get a mock-up going so that we can see what our vision will look like on a screen. But the basis is that members of the American Association for Anatomy will have access through their membership to these images. Non-members, it will be a small fee. That's sort of where we are right now with that. The details have not been fleshed out. But our goal is really to provide educators with those resources that are so needed, right? And I can be honest, when I was going through school, undergrad, PT school, my PhD, that wasn't something that even came into my mind, because the only thing that separated me really from Homo perfectus, aside from some abdominal muscles and things, was gender. Right. So it wasn't even a thought in my head until I started putting together my own textbook and having to use the publisher's stock photos. There was no diversity. There's one male person of color and one female person of color, and that's it. And for anyone who's in anatomy education, we've seen those two individuals, right? So this project, like I said, is in the creation phase, and we're super excited about it. We're super passionate about it. And, the goal is multifold, right? We want to use these images to enhance the learning environment for our students. We want them to see themselves in these images, the images being photographs and illustrations. So pairing up with these awesome medical illustrators to sort of get them involved is huge. And we've got some photographers on our team that have also been vetted and are very passionate about this. The other thing that I think this project does is that we have at all angles tried to make sure that our team of creatives and our base team is diverse, right? So it is another opportunity to expand that representation in industries that may be underrepresented for certain groups. And that's been very intentional. And I think it's just made this project that much better. And we're hopeful. I don't want to give a launch date, but this is a 2-year project, and the end of 2023 is we'll be here before we know it. So we're hopeful that these resources will be available for our membership and those who are non-members. It should be something that is easy to access for educational use. And Jerry, I welcome you to add anything I may have forgotten.
Sure. I think, that was an awesome summary of the project. I would maybe add just a couple of things. One is that this, so the name says portfolios of people. And so another piece of this is that that we're going to emphasize the people or the particular person, both the model and the person that will then ultimately be illustrated, as well as the illustrators. So we're going to invite everybody, if they so choose, to write a statement about who they are as people and how they got to where they are, how they identify, anything they want to share, because it emphasizes the individuality of each person and the value of each person. And that some educators may want to bring that into the classroom as part of the discussion as they're teaching anatomy. And then in terms of other groups, in terms of diversity, the hope is to include intersex and transgendered people as well. The scope is quite large, and I think we have the energy though to do it, and so we're all very excited about it.
Great, thanks. And speaking of, so a question in the chat here is asking, how are transgender and intersex bodies represented in medical illustration? I'm wondering if any of our medical illustrators have any experience with that and want to comment on some considerations and things that you went through in designing. No. So perhaps a void that is worth investigating. So that's interesting.
I'll just tell you that when I was in school, those words weren't even mentioned, weren't talked about.
Right.
Period. Full stop.
So do any of you?
I
go
can
ahead,
speak to that really quickly. Sorry. I haven't done a lot of transgender illustrations, but I do know that I can say that working in the medical education space, it is something that has been really lacking in medical education. And we've had students actually talk about how that element is missing from the curriculum. So about a year ago, we did have an intern who worked with my department to create a course on transgender procedures, various different transgender procedures. And it was so well received by students and faculty. It's something that I definitely think is missing, especially in the medical education space. So people are just learning about this. I think as medical illustrators, that's also another area that I feel like is not being touched and addressed as much as it should. And so, it's something that definitely I'm seeing at least an increase where I am. I'm not sure about other spaces in medical education and other schools, but it is something that we are starting to address here, the lack of knowledge about those procedures and stuff.
I can also share briefly. I agree that, as we were talking about Homo perfectus earlier, that's even more dramatic when it comes to this topic, intersex or transgender, just because these are culturally things that we don't even really talk about socially. And so if you're really going to your resources and that's all you can find, or you're not sure what to look, or even the vocabulary isn't empowering that's being used around these things, it can be very negatively effective to individuals who are in these populations. And then the more that physicians or medical students don't know how to address these in the clinics or when they're even talking to their patients. I worked at a company, a virtual reality company called Embody Labs when I was starting out, and we actually were working to incorporate this. We did like virtual reality labs for taking on a patient's perspective and showing care providers what it was like to experience some kind of disease state or embody like a different individual. And one of the stories that we told was about a transgender individual who was aging and how their access to care or how they're treated in clinics is completely different. And we tried to incorporate like part of that, a large part of that was like educating care providers of like, I mean, it sounds silly, but it's like, why even tell this story? We had to kind of like, you know, push against some folks who didn't understand the importance of why we were even, you know, highlighting this this story at all, which was, I mean, I feel like they still haven't really fully achieved like the response that we're trying to get there, but you know, it matters to just have these represented.
Can I jump in on that? I just think like the overarching goal of what we're discussing and pop art is really to including this sort of having our learning space be safe and inclusive and representative. It is, if we are training future physicians, therapists, anybody that's interacting with people, right? But by limiting what they're being exposed to, we're limiting their skill set. We're limiting their ability to make a connection with a person, right? So all of this is further enhancing that humanity of medicine or humanity of science, right? That we think is so sort of cut and dry, but what's missing is that humanity. So if I can incorporate, like I would love, I had to go to the internet to pull images of what a gender affirming surgery might look like, right? But that's limited. If we could have more of that, just to bring the topic in to our classrooms. It doesn't even have to be a full, you know, elective or course on it. It's just introducing, guess what? Not all of your patients are going to look like this. Guess what? If you're going into OBGYN, you are going to, you know, you're going to have to be equipped with this knowledge that you're not seeing just cisgender women. Okay. So I think all of it, the biggest goal is preparing our learners just to really make those connections and treat their patients as people and respect who they are and how they identify. And if we don't do that, we're failing them and we're failing the patients. So I'll get off my soapbox, but that's how I feel.
Thanks.
And I would like to sort of piggyback onto that, because so here at U of L, University of Louisville, there is a very deliberate push within the curriculum to improve communication between healthcare providers and patients. And so these learners are being exposed to, you know, interview skills and clinical skill practice sessions that are tackling these kinds of issues. And so I think it's extremely important for, you know, anatomy educators in particular, because that's, you know, close to my heart, that we keep up with the training. And so if our training remains sort of traditional and very narrow in who we represent in terms of the images that we use to teach with, then, you know, we're not in alignment with the rest of the curriculum. And I think that's also important for us to not fall behind, you know, our colleagues that are teaching clinical skills that are sort of where we would like to be.
Go ahead, Eva.
I just wanted to add one quick thing. In addition to all the empathy that Kelly was describing and keeping up with the modern medicine, as Jerry was describing, I think one of the other reasons why it's important to have this kind of representation, specifically for transgender individuals, but also for any other quote unquote variation is, I don't know if we've mentioned this before, but like very specifically to avoid misdiagnoses. Like it's just like a very tangible like reason or why this is so important. Like for example, for transgender folks, if you have a trans woman, the doctor should know that they probably still need to screen for like prostate cancer or or vice versa for trans males for breast cancer. So these are things that like might not come naturally, especially if you're looking at the chart. That's another thing with charts, is like you check off like your gender on the medical charts. I don't know how that's being updated now, but like it's like, do you put what you're presenting as, or do you put your biological sex? And like the clinicians need to be trained on how best to make sure to get the correct information, like clinically relevant information out of their patients. So, I mean, that's just like some food for thought, I guess.
Is interesting, especially when we start getting into the digitized resources, I think, and a lot of these interactive resources. So this kind of bleeds into the question in the chat here of things like the Anatomage, or I don't know if I'm saying that right, the Anatomage tables and the Medtronic things. I know Complete Anatomy with that modeling system just put out their first female model recently, but do anyone of you know if there's anything going on behind the scenes about increasing representation in those types of resources? I know they can be very difficult to program and things like that, but do you have any experience in any of that?
No. I do not know. We don't use that table, but what a great way that if that's your only resource to bring that in. I was shocked that, Complete Anatomy just brought the female form in. I went to the party and I was just sort of like, wow, they're really proud. And I'm not to knock them. And, this is progress, but I was sort of shocked.
Yeah.
I think that I was going to say, I think that's just a great question and point to bring up, because I do feel like cadavers are becoming less and less common. And we are relying more on technology in the medical education space, which is why the Anatomage table is a really cool advancement in technology and way to study the body. And unfortunately, I don't know of any like sort of progress in that area and more representation in those sort of resources. Even Complete Anatomy has that same kind of archetype that we've been describing before of like the athletic, white male body. And so those resources, I definitely think it's really important for the people creating that content to keep representation front of mind, because we are moving more in technology as time goes on. We're moving towards technology and relying more on that than old methods of teaching. And so I think that technology definitely, it needs to be combined with everything that we're talking about, because it will perpetuate the same problems as we move forward with all these sort of advancements.
Yeah, I remember in my conversations with the people at Complete Anatomy, they seem to be thinking about these things, but I foolishly asked, well, why don't we just add a slider for body fat or something like that? And they said, well, because that would take years of programming. And I think a lot of those companies, not necessarily those companies, but people working on them, like to hide a bit behind the technological barriers, right? So I think you're right. It is, they're valid and those things take time, but they do need to keep things like that front of mind. So
if I could I just wanted to say something real quick about the digital approach to teaching anatomy, and maybe just circle back to an earlier topic that we addressed of anatomical diversity and variation. That as this, switch, some schools, some new medical schools, some allopathic and osteopathic, are building new medical schools without a gross lab because of this. And so, what this also tends to do is really emphasize the one standard anatomy that was programmed into the teaching tool, whatever it is. And so when, going back to the complaint about anatomical diversity in the lab, that it's, not high yield, it gets in my way, and I will sometimes say, in addition to you need to think more deeply about this. This is problem solving skills, all of these other advantages of having this gift of the anatomical donor. But that's another one that this is real life, that, this variation is real life, and you lose that when you end up studying from a single digital version of a human. No matter what skin wrapper they end up putting on it, it's still, it's programming for a single set of anatomical patterns. And I think there's a risk there for learners to think this is it, and this is all I need to know.
Great, thanks. So I think we have about 25 or less minutes. I'm not sure, but just I guess time for a couple more questions. And something I want to, or I guess two things I want to touch on. First is a question from Karis in the chat, Karis Martin. She says there is a large push for materials and resources being open access. So how does open access influence the role of the medical illustrator and the willingness for an illustrator to work on such a project? Any of our illustrators done any open access stuff that they can?
Maybe I'll check. I haven't done any open access work, but I do think I've worked primarily in a studio setting, so I think it's always dictated by kind of what the art director, what the company owner wants, and what the client needs. Obviously, we have to eat too, so that's a big part of it. I feel like for open access projects, it's usually a lot of labor of love. I know what is it? It's like the molecular developer that he does it for free. It's like one of those kind of protein modelers, but it's better than Pylon or Pymol. Anyways, the point is from what I've heard is he does it all on his own dime, all on his own time. And I think that that's a really big ask of most people. And especially when you have a lot of people who are leading the charge in pushing for diverse images are BIPOC people themselves. I think that this is an area that you have to understand that maybe needs to be, infiltrated with some money, if that makes sense, and support the artists who are doing the work. Yeah.
Great question.
I think that's sort of, I mean, that's one of our main goals, right? None of the money that is funding this project goes to any of the core team members. It's all going to creatives and sort of sustaining, there's a little marketing bucket, but it's small. I mean, we really did some work in the planning phase to say, what is fair market for X, Y, and Z, and I'm proud that the AAA really backed that and said, okay, this is a big project, but we believe in what you're doing, and we want to pay people what they deserve for the work they're doing. I don't think free. I don't know that open access necessarily means free. Maybe it's you give up the rights to. Maybe there's a pay for service. I don't know all the lingo, but. Yeah, I definitely think anyone who's creating something should be paid for it.
It seems that Karis would agree. She wanted to clarify that the illustrator would be paid, but that end product would be open access, right? So I guess that gets more into copyright and things like that. But yeah.
But we could also say that I think the open access issue. We were also very mindful in the planning stages of pop art to look at barriers for how that educators would face in sort of getting access to these images, and so as Kelly said, that some of the financial aspects of that exact arrangement are still being worked out, but the goal is to not have there be a financial barrier for educators so that so these illustrations and photographs are going to be actually used. So we are very mindful of that.
Mhm. Cool. And so a question that I kind of have for everybody too is aside from all of the images that you're creating and the things that you're producing, how does your work in your field sort of lend itself to that idea of decolonization, reclaiming the body? I know, SJ, you have some outreach work that you do, and these kinds of examples, can you share any of those experiences to how we can sort of work to increase representation away from just images in the medical illustration field?
Yeah, so I guess, I think my work kind of plays off of, I think, what Jerry was talking a little bit about, advancing with the times in his department, which I think is something that's really, really important for faculty level to do, because my main goals are to increase representation and diversity of students. I do a lot of outreach work in Nunavut and Nunavik. Teaching them about medical illustration, anatomy in general, doing kind of like one-on-one sessions and then also class sessions. But yeah, I mean, as much as we can do that work and do session after session and, hopefully push students into going and choosing these careers, I think it's like also important that the school spaces that they end up in are safe spaces, because we get a lot of students, Indigenous students, who end up going to university, and the dropout rates are much, much, much higher because universities aren't always a safe space, and they aren't always respectful of different identities and things like that. So I really think what Jerry was talking about was really, really important as well from a faculty level. But yeah, so just trying to raise awareness about like the career itself as an option for students, because I think it's like something you maybe don't really think about, as like being able to combine these two weird worlds together and become a science illustrator.
Just piggybacking off of SJ, like I know that most young people are on social media all the time. And so that's why I made it like my point of duty to spread awareness through my social media. So every day I post my work progress and I say like what I'm doing, the research I'm doing for it, and they follow me throughout the whole entire thing. And I feel like just them seeing that it's doable, and by someone who even looks like them, they're like, okay, this is attainable. You know what I mean? And a lot of people, they're artistic and they're also scientific. And they're kind of forced by society to go into the scientific route and to choose that because that's what's going to impress everyone. And they don't know, a lot of people when they meet me, they're just like, I didn't even know that was a thing. And, I type in symptoms in Google all the time and I see a little picture at the side, but no one thinks that humans draw it. Like they just think that it's there, it just appears. And so we're kind of like unsung heroes. We impact a lot of things, that like the way people think about certain things and how they think about themselves. And just being able to put that out there and show people like you can go into this field, it's heartwarming. If you like, it makes you feel good that you can spread the word about this and that the community will grow, because now you can give the information that's necessary for them to move forward successfully. A lot of parents have reached out to me and said, hey, my daughter, she wants to get into this thing and I'm not sure how or if it's going to be a good path for her. And I'm like, yes. And I'll tell them all the schools that they can apply to, the subjects that they should take. And I'm always open to answering those questions and having meetups with students who want to talk to me about my life as a medical illustrator. So that's definitely a way in which I help to spread the word.
Amazing. Great. And so nice jumping off point to then how can people who aren't medical illustrators, actually, first I'll say, I think as medical illustrators, you guys have an incredible almost privileged to do something really cool and creative that draws people in too. So like you said, on social media, that's like showing your process, I think, is a great way to really, broadcast the intensity of what you do and the beauty of what you do as well. So that's awesome. But how can people support these types of initiatives, both things like pop art or just you as medical illustrators? What are some ways that we, the public, the non-medical illustrating public, can support you in creating more diverse images?
I think for people who are non-medical illustrators, the way that you could support, I think organizations like this, like Black Anatomy, the opportunity to speak on a panel about this and just bringing awareness to it. Podcasts, if you host a podcast, like invite us to your podcast, like just, I think things like that, like inviting us to conversations, because kind of like what Anekay was saying, I have had similar experiences where I've spoken to parents that are saying like, oh, I didn't know that this was an option for my kid. And I've even had young teenagers like email me and stuff because they found my website, or maybe they saw a talk that I went to. And there's always this like amount of just excitement, mostly because I look like them too. It's not just, someone that they normally see, they may not have been as interested, but because they're like a young Black girl and they see me doing it, it gets them really excited about it. So I think bringing awareness to it, involving us in conversations and stuff, anything along those lines, like really helps. And I also do a lot of outreach too. So I see the amount that young people are, like how receptive they are to hearing about this field. I think like it's very standard to hear about doctor, lawyer, or whatever in school. And there's so much more beyond that. So even learning about medical illustration, even if you don't want to do medical illustration, it just opens your eyes to the fact that there are other things out there. There's so many different careers just in STEM that I think a lot of students are not even aware of. So, yeah.
Awesome. And since you brought up Black Anatomy, I just want to say there's also a donation button on our website now, and we're selling merch. And that the goal of that too is to essentially be able to fund initiatives like this and future initiatives that bring more people into the field. So obviously, yeah, the platform is good, and so is the money. So so just a shameless plug there. Does anyone else have anything in addition from the pop art side?
I might, as an anatomist, I'll say, if you're asked to review, review a textbook or review an atlas or review something and give your feedback, to be sure to include that in your feedback. If you're a student and it's now very okay to give your feedback about your experience in the learning space. And so that feedback can go to faculty, it can go to administrators, it can go to publishers, it can go all over the place. And so speak out, and it will definitely help, for sure.
Eva?
Oh, yes, thanks. I just wanted to chime in and say that, yes, I think we want to hear all these stories and we want to tell all these stories. And that is only possible with a more diverse group of like every part of the collaborative process, illustrators, anatomists, even the patients coming to you and also giving like their feedback or their lived experiences, so that we can help create a more accurate picture of reality. And then I just wanted to use like 2 seconds to shout out to anyone who's watching that's Filipino, because I just feel like I took like a very circuitous route to get into this field, and it's probably true for other underrepresented groups or immigrant families. Like the doctor, lawyer, engineer, whatever is like the go-to, and you must do those. And a lot of folks, because of like these cultural values, you want to honor whatever your parents say and all this and that. So there's always a lot of pressure in these communities to go into medicine, or for Filipinos for nursing, and that has a lot of historical context. But I just want to say that this is a thing that I know a lot of artistic Filipinos. I've done talks for universities in the Philippines to try and get them aware and to provide access. And I know currently of two other Filipino illustrators, and I'd love to know more. So just shouting out there. And also one last thing. Well, maybe I won't say it. I just want to say question why there are no Filipinos on Grey's Anatomy. But anyway, I think there's one on Chicago Med. So shout out to that actor and whoever casted her. But yeah, I think the representation just feels good.
Well, just a reminder to all of our audience members, we will be distributing the recording of this event. So if any of you have any connections to Grey's Anatomy, producers or things like that, you can just forward that along. But as we are kind of getting to the wrap-up phase, there's been lots of talk about how great it is to work with medical illustrators and how skillful you guys are at creating your work. So are you available for hire? And if so, how can people contact you and set something up? So if each of you want to kind of give your plug, then let's do that. SJ, I saw you speak, so you're up.
I just said who first, but then, okay, I guess I'll go first. Hello at Vernacular Studios. And then I'm also on Instagram at Vernacular Studios as well. But yeah, just send me an email. I'm pretty busy with my PhD work, so I can be kind of choosy, but yeah, I do a lot of molecular stuff too. If that's your thing.
Maybe Anekay next.
Yeah, so my email is Anekay Kelly, ANEKAY KELLY @gmail.com. My Instagram is drawn_by_Anekay. And yeah, you can reach out to me, tell me all the details of what you would like for me to do, and I'll let you know if it's possible, or because, you know, I do neurosurgery on a daily basis. So sometimes I have to gauge the amount of work I'm putting into certain things. So yeah.
Great. Next is Eva on my screen.
Yeah, so I can be found on Instagram at Afferent Visuals, and then email is Eva at Afferent Visuals, the sensory neuron. So, and I say yes to a lot of things. So I do a lot. I don't know if that's a quality, but yeah. And if I can't do it, I'll help you find someone who can.
Awesome. Mika?
Can we just coin that sensory neuron dance? Sensory neuron, that was cute. Yeah, so I can be found at in_biovisuals on Instagram. And then my email is nikafordvisuals@gmail. So that's Nika Ford, like without the hyphen. So NIKAFORD visuals@gmail.
Awesome. And then Jerry, I don't know if you're doing contract work or what your status is on the Med Illustrator side.
I still do a little bit of work, but it's pretty exclusive to actually my own lectures sometimes, and manuscripts or papers that I'm working on. So I'm probably not, but happy to talk about anything talk to anybody about anything. And so if anybody does want to email, it's my first name, which is actually not what's on the screen, which says Jerry with a J. It's Gerard with a G, GERARD dot my last name, GUILLOT at Louisville.edu.
And I guess since I don't want to leave Kelly out, you could be the point of contact for pop art.
I can be the point of contact. Yes. Kelly.Harrell@vcuhealth.org. I can draw rainbows and trees and maybe a cute puppy, but it's kind of at that like kid level, so probably not hired for illustrations.
Some great Black Anatomy color pages online, so
yes,
if you're not artistically inclined, please check those out on our website. Otherwise too, you can contact us if you want to get in touch with any of these fine people. We will hook you up and do what we can. But yeah, so that's pretty much all we have time for. I think we did a great job. We had an amazing group of panels with some awesome stories. So thank you all for joining us for that. Huge thank you to the panelists for sharing all of their brilliance with us. And as I said, a recording is going to be made available probably on our website. Not sure when exactly, but keep your eye out for that. Make sure when you do see it, you share it around as much as you can. Also, I just want to quickly shout out to all of our remaining Black Anatomy events. So this here is the schedule. You can check that out on our website or through our Twitter as well. So tomorrow we're running a community social event. Everyone is welcome. Come hang out, chat, network. And then on Saturday, Nika is actually hosting for the second year in a row a paint, I don't want to call it a paint night, I've been calling it a paint night, but it's a paint afternoon at 12 p.m. Eastern. So come check that out, hang out with us, listen to some music, and do some painting. And other than that, that's it. I guess I should say the social is at 5 p.m. Eastern. But otherwise, thanks for coming out, and we'll see you online.